Ms. Bradford Gray, I know you heard Mr. Pratt's very quick summary of his written testimony, so I'm sure you have very similar approach here.
Well, I will say this.
Please identify yourself first.
Thank you.
Yeah,
My name is Keira
you.
Bradford Gray. I'm the Chief Defender of the Defender Association of Philadelphia.
Okay.
Along with me is Mr. Jim McHugh. He is our First Assistant, as well as Ms. Carolyn Jester, who is our Chief Financial Officer. I do want to acknowledge all the women and men in the audience who are part of our Defender staff. Particularly, we have our Diversity Inclusion Officer and our Recruitment Director. We have our data analyst, Aaron Siegel. We have our chief of our trial unit, and we have a lot of our administrative staff as well as our social service staff with us. I do want to say today is Administrative Professionals Day, and I want to wish all the administrative professionals a happy Administrative Professional Day. And I say that because it's pretty thematic in terms of what we'll be asking for today. As you can have seen through our budget written submission, is that the Defender Association is asking for an increase in their appropriation in the amount of $1,888,000. This increase will be used to supply a livable wage to all the administrative staff that work in our office, that are the backbone of our organization. And I know you've heard about all the great things that have been going on in our city in terms of criminal justice reform, but I will say this, the narrative of what's going on will not be complete unless you understand the role that the Defender Association plays in that criminal justice reform effort. So Larry did a wonderful job at presenting the issues, presenting all the savings that we have made with all of our efforts to remain consistent with criminal justice reform. However, some of the things that are not being told are how those things are achieved by all parties. The Defender Association has stepped up tremendously, and it's not just our lawyers, but it's our administrative staff, our social service advocates, our paralegals, our investigators, and of course our secretarial staff that help us create data so that we can bring this information to you. One of the things that the Defender Association is most proud of is not the fact that we've been able to impact criminal justice reform at the trial level as well as the policy level, but our strategic community engagement and partnership that has really brought about some extreme success in our long-term goals. And the long-term goals I'm talking about are what has been pretty much calculated from the Criminal Justice Committee created by Council President Clark, and that is to have a system that uses taxpayer dollars wisely, that is fundamentally fair. By fundamentally fair, we mean that does not use racial bias or economic bias to make decisions, and three, one that promotes public safety. The Defender is looking for and happy to be a part of working towards a system that actually rehabilitates instead of devastates, and one that actually uses the community's concept of justice at all steps of the process. I'll start with understanding the impact that the Defender Association has on the city. Oh, and I'm sorry, let me go back to the livable wage. One of the reasons that I'm asking to support our request for a livable wage is because I need to tell you about the types of salaries that we've been able to give some of these dedicated people that work very hard in our office and have worked in overdrive in this criminal justice reform era. Many of our staff, and there's about 263 of the staff in this category, do not earn a livable wage. 45 of them do not earn $15 an hour, and I know that's not consistent to what the city of Philadelphia wants for its city workers. 71% of our administrative staff earn between $25,000 and $38,000. $25,000 is less than the ceiling, the floor of a new administrative employee in the city of Philadelphia. That starts at $29,000. 1/3 of our administrative staff earn in the 20,000s. The majority of these employees are not even contributing to their retirement plan because we are not pensioned. We cannot be, at this time, we have not gotten a definite answer from the pension fund as to whether or not we would qualify under the IRS tax guidelines. Mr. Jim McHugh wrote a wonderful brief to the pension fund asking for our office to be a part of it. As of right now, we have not gotten an answer. We expect to get one shortly. But in any event, our support staff, our administrative staff have not been able to contribute to their own retirement, which leads them to work much longer than they would have expected. 25 of our employees who worked at the Defender more than 10 years earn less than $35,000. And of these 10 employees, we have people that have been working at the Defenders for 15 to 20 years and make about $31,000.
Ms. Bradford Gray, could I just interrupt you for a second while it's on our minds here?
Sure.
you contract with the city, right?
We do.
Don't we have a living wage law as far as the salaries are supposed to be paid?
Well, we see it up on the screen there in terms of that it's been advertised as such, and I'm hoping that the Defender Association staff can enjoy that.
Has that ever
benefit
been
as well.
raised, as far as you know, with the city on that whole issue?
We're raising it now, and this is the first time we've been raising it. And actually, since the bill passed in April, this would be the first opportunity that we would have to actually ask to be a part of that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just wanted, while that was in my mind, we raised that here. I said, geez, you are contractors, aren't you? Okay.
Yes, we
All
contract, and about 98% of our funding comes from the city, and this is part of the IRS tax guidelines. So as you can see, we have people that are working hard for the city, working hard to advance goals, saving money, saving people, saving lives, that are not being compensated for their effort. And I'm here today on behalf of all of them, and on behalf of the work that the men and women of the Defender Association do every day since 1934 to impact sensible criminal justice policies and practices. I heard Councilman David O's question to Larry Krasner about what's your role. I want to say this is our lane. Criminal justice reform has been our work, our mission, and has driven what we do since 1934. And fast forward to 2015, we've expanded that role not just beyond the courtroom. We've looked at ways to impact reform on the policy level, working with council members here, working with community, and working with state legislators, as well as building trusting relationships with community that support sensible and smart on crime initiatives, and not just goes for the fast fix of reducing prison populations without understanding what drives the behavior. With that, I'll talk about some of the work, and I will make this as brief as I can, that we do. This is how much we impact the city of Philadelphia. Our office has represented, with 246 lawyers and the support staff that I just mentioned, represented 47,714 of Philadelphia's residents in 2018 alone in various systems. We represent pretty much all of the people on probation and parole. There are a few that have the ability to hire private counsel, but in any event, the Defender Association takes on that role. We represent people in the child welfare system, the one that you just discussed with Mr. Pratt, as well as the juvenile delinquent system. So we have a lot of information that informs us of the flaws in the system and how it impacts families and communities as well. So the Defender has a very unique voice to inform meaningful criminal justice reform, but actually we have a voice to lead this effort as well, and we've been doing that on a number of efforts. We have identified two main drivers of mass incarceration. When I say mass incarceration, I mean needless incarceration that is only impacted because of policies that we have engaged in that do not go to whether or not a person is dangerous or they have a risk of appearing. These policies allow people to spend time in jail that cost the taxpayers, but also cost the people that are sitting in jail and their families that rely on them. The human cost has never been calculated in this way, and it needs to, because if we're really going to get to public safety, we have to understand, have we made people more desperate, and to what cost has that had on communities? And I believe the community behind me, the community that we've been working with, can tell you some of those devastating effects of people who come back, who have lost jobs, who have lost houses, and now find themselves taking from the community rather than adding value to it. One of the ways we have done this is we identified our pretrial population, and we've taken advantage of the MacArthur opportunities that we've had and shared with the district attorney and the courts, and of course our prisons, to impact that pretrial experience. This is what we have termed pre-entry. Pre-entry is important because we understand waiting until re-entry to service people, to understand what people need, leaves us all devastated. Because what happens is people get detached from what little they have. We wait till re-entry, and about 40% of that population never get those services. Why? Because 40% of the population sit in pretrial on cash bail. Their cases are withdrawn, dismissed, or found not guilty. Then they are released back into the community with nothing that they came in with. That does not help anyone, and what we have been doing is working hard to make better decisions on that front end so that we can address those issues that drive behaviors and that we don't have to brandish everyone with a criminal conviction. The reason why that is so important is because the two major workforce development agencies in the state of Pennsylvania have identified it recently as March of 2019 that criminal convictions is undeniably the biggest driver of poverty. That's a big area to focus on. If a criminal conviction is undeniably the main driver of poverty, why do we give out these convictions so loosely? We need to be much more careful and critical as to who is becoming a convicted felon for life or a convicted person with a misdemeanor for life and who may not need that, because we are creating an underclass in our society just because we're not careful at our approach to criminal justice. What we've been doing with our pre-entry efforts is we have shifted our structure to put resources and benefits on the front end. We've been using community collaboratives to make this happen. We've hired what we call bail navigators, because what we've been focused on is releasing people out of jail because we're not using bail as much as we used to. But that story is not complete if we do not understand what drives them and what they need to stay arrest-free and to make all of their court obligations. Our bail navigates have done just that. They work with people to obtain IDs so they can get into treatment. They work with people to obtain benefits that they would have been able to have otherwise, but they did not understand the process. So these benefits had led to successful treatment options for people. They have worked with placement and treatment and programs to obtain employment for those who are coming out on the front end. And the reason why they were in here in the first place is because they didn't have viable employment options. They're looking for community supports that are long-lasting. They build trust and engage people at the granular level so that they can come in and give other alternatives to our justice practices. And it's been working. Well, in 3 months of using these bail navigators, and I must say, the people that we hire for bail navigators are not only social workers, but they are people who are returning citizens with lived experience, and they can give us more intelligence as to what we need to do with our practice model than any other information that we could have gotten alone or through our training or law school books. This has been a wonderful model that is impacting the entire outcome of the system, and it just doesn't it doesn't get told enough or quantified enough to understand why it's so important. 101 clients have been served in just 3 months. 9 out of 10 of them showed up for court. 3 out of 4 actively followed their release plans, meaning they got engaged with services and they came into court with more of an understanding of what they've been able to do to address their issues than the courts could have on the back end. That has led to a lot of alternative opportunities for people to be diverted from the system, not get that criminal conviction, and get back to work. Some of the people that we use, we call this our pre-entry coalition. These are providers and community members that are already in our communities, that are already paid for, that already have grants or some other structure in place that we haven't been using in our criminal justice practice and process. But we, and the Defender Association, has used our social service advocates as well as our lawyers to go out into the neighborhoods and figure out what's there. We've also been collectively having great conversations with a number of our community members, a number of our activists, and people who are responsible for building a coalition for a just DA to say, this is what we need, and how can you help us create a system and approach that allows us to gain access to these things. We've also been able to use the city's municipal ID services program to really engage people and get people the IDs necessary that they need to transition into meaningful opportunities for themselves. So I want to thank all the people that are in our pre-entry coalition, the community providers, the supports that have been these unsung heroes for a long time that we haven't strategically engaged in this effort to reform our system long term. About 2 years ago, I sat here in front of this council and I said, bail reform is on the rise. Criminal justice system, it cannot succeed the way we're doing things now. And many states have found this bail practice unconstitutional. In fact, our jurisdiction alone is being sued for its bail practices that we are currently engaged in. I said that the train has left the station and the only question is, when will states get on board? Since then, at that time, there were only 2 states that were on board, DC and New Jersey. Since then, you can see there's been a national movement and more states have joined that force. The Defender Association has learned through the work of the Criminal Justice Reform Committee, as well as through some really intelligent people on the staff that are on the Supreme Court's Rules Committee and people that understand data and analysis, that there are best practices that we can learn from and implement in our own structure. And we did just that. Our office, and I'm very proud of this, came up with a reimagined pretrial system that we presented to the court. This system will provide us the opportunity not only to address needs on the front end, but also to weed out and differentiate between the people that come into our court system. Believe it or not, prior to us really focusing on this front end, we never gave an understanding or created understanding of who a person was until the back end of the system. And that was after they sat in jail for about 6 to 8 months, just to find out whether or not they can be released to the community. At that time, it's too late. We have made people more desperate, and that is not something that helps drive our public safety goals and initiatives. Not also to mention, it actually ruins and drains our tax dollars, which could be used, as District Attorney Krasner said, for other qualities of life. But basically how this system would work is that we would really use our summons process much better. We would use it actually, period. Philadelphia is the only county in Pennsylvania that does not use a summons process for low-level offenses. Every other county in Pennsylvania does. I was the chief defender in Montgomery County. DUIs, where people were not particularly dangerous, were allowed to get summons. Many other low-level misdemeanors were allowed to get summons. This really allowed people not to come in contact with the option of being given cash bail and sitting in jail for a certain amount of time needlessly. That system actually drives the cost of the county. When you're talking about our prison costs, after 31 days of someone being jailed pretrial, if they had benefits such as Medicaid or Medicare coming into the system, which is a state cost, Medicaid and Medicare, those benefits are turned off, and then the county picks that up through our jail medical budget line item. And that is a waste of resources when we can make sure that the people that can be out can stay out, get connected to their resources so that that cost is not on the counties. Secondly, right now, the way we deal with our pretrial system, we have no opportunity to talk to someone before they are being given a amount of bail that they may not be able to afford or that they may not deserve or need. That just seems fundamentally wrong. If someone is going for a hearing because they're being accused of something and there's going to be a determination of whether or not they should be in jail or out of jail, one should have the ability to talk to their lawyer. That does not happen right now. Not only do we not have the ability to talk to the person, we don't have the ability to understand who they are, what they're connected to, and what their responsibilities and obligations are. How can we make such major decisions with very little information as to what we're doing to people? That really causes us to make I'd say the worst decisions that we can possibly make, and it really makes us less, liable to making sure that we're dealing with really good practices that advance opportunities in our city. This has been carefully considered, looking at every rule, every state statute that would impact our ability to do this. This is not something we took lightly. This is something that we took, like I said, 2 years to do. And we wanted to make sure that we had the proper balance. We weren't just releasing people based on charge, but based on individualized assessment of whether or not you're a danger or you're not. That's how determination should be made. It shouldn't be made, oh, you're charged with this, so you should be out. You're charged with this, so you should be in. Those are wrong decisions, and that has caused us to cripple our justice system. And so this system right now that we came up with would allow us to make much better analysis on the front end and would allow many more people to have the opportunity to be outside, to fight their case, to do just that, with the support of community that is not only helping them, but holding them accountable to make all of their appointments and make sure that they do not make us go in a regressive state and they pay it forward by abiding by the conditions of release. So this has been the perfect model, and community has been an extreme benefit in this practice. We can't do it alone. We are only one entity. We only have but so many resources, but that warm handoff, that engagement with community has allowed us to see some real success. Another area that we have been, I'd say, leading in terms of reform, and I know we've heard a lot from the district attorney about probation and parole reform, and we've heard a lot from advocates. However, the Defender Association has been involved in looking at probation and parole for decades. We not only have been involved in it, we've actually been effectuating it through our practice. We know that 1 in 22 people are on supervision in the city of Philadelphia, and 54.6% of Philadelphia's jail population has been in custody either on a parole or probation detainer. I'm sure Councilman Jones can attest to this, that when we went to the prison and we asked how many people were in on detainers, a lot of hands went up. And so this practice that we have noticed that drives needless incarceration needed to be fixed. And in 2017, our office wrote a letter to the First Judicial District asking them to change this practice of bringing people into the criminal justice system and incarcerating them based on an allegation that they may have messed up. I know we've seen this narrative through the Meek Mill situation, and while people may be sympathetic or not to him, it really shines a light on some of the things that can happen to people even when they're doing well and contributing to their community. We would set them back by putting them in jail if they had a minor brush-in with the law. We would set them back by putting them in jail if they forgot an appointment or missed a phone call. Even if they had jobs or have been reporting as they said they would, some of the people would be incarcerated for months because of an allegation of a violation. After asking the FJD to do such a task, which is look at the way we practice with detainer and probation structure, we actually came into agreement with a new process that has allowed us to really look at and engage people who are on detainers that get locked up on minor offenses differently. That has resulted in just a few months in 578 people being released from custody that should not have been there. It has also given us a net savings in just those 3 months. If we're looking on the most conservative side of that, the fact that people might have been there for 6 days, that's the most conservative side of $400,000. If you're looking at the most conservative estimate of just tweaking this practice, we could save $1.2 million in over a year, which is more than what we're even asking for in our increase for our staff. There are 3,500 fewer people in custody because of our vantage point on detainer practices, and I would give it credit to probation and parole. They have actually been acquiescing in some of our requests for detainer and probation reform. Our office also looks at reducing the prison population by looking at people who have the opportunity to be released on some kind of probation plan or parole plan. In 2018, our office filed 1,110 early parole petitions. That is a lot of petitions, and that could not be done without our paralegals and our support staff. Again, these are the backbone of our organization. 85% of those petitions were granted by judges. That resulted in a net savings of $6.8 million. And how we calculated that is we looked at the length of their sentence. We took at the time that our parole position was granted and the person was released, we looked at the remainder of the time that they would have been in, but not for us filing those petitions, and we calculated based on the average cost of $120 a day. That is an actual cost, not a projected cost, and that has really resulted not only in a cost savings, but also in a human savings in terms of allowing people to get back to work and support their families. Helping people overcome barriers. This is something that I'm very proud that the Defender Association has taken on. It is not just representing people in court and looking at policies, but is also looking at access to justice and creating opportunities for people to re-enter their communities. We provide expungement services in our everyday practice. So from Monday through Friday, if you had constituents that don't know how to access and get expungements, our office does them. You come into our office, we will service them. Last year alone, we filed 4,509 expungement petitions. That is more than any entity in the city of Philadelphia or in this state of Pennsylvania. We've also worked with many of our elected officials and our city council people, Councilwoman Parker, Councilman Jones, and community expungement clinics. We take it to the neighborhoods when people can't travel down to Center City to get that service. And we've been really excited about what we've been able to do. Our overall community expungement clinic participation resulted in 750 expungement petitions being drawn. We've taken it to not only rec centers, but barbershops. We've engaged people and informed people on the things that they need to do and make sure that they are always looking at opportunities to keep their records clean. Many people were under the false assumption that if they were found not guilty or if they were just arrested and their case was withdrawn, they had no record. They found this harsh reality to be devastating when they went for jobs and these things came up. Even the cleaning or the sealing bill does not always allow people to hide some of these arrest data or conviction data, because if you have an entity or an employment agency that does an FBI check, these things can still be seen. So expungement are really critical because that destroys the records when people deserve to have their records destroyed. Next slide. Another thing that the Defender Association does, which is a watchdog that no other entity in this city can do, is looking at policing practices. I know the law department has access to data, and they do have a civil rights unit, but we look at it in terms of what policing practices or trends drive the population of people into our system. And we understand that there are vastly different experiences between different communities with policing. But one of the things we have found is that while we talk about stop and frisk and how it's going down, we're looking at pedestrian encounters. We have looked at, in certain high concentration of minority neighborhoods, the practice of police in those areas has not substantially changed. And so while people are putting a lot of heat on, our elected officials on stop and frisk practices, and we keep hearing that it's going down, people aren't feeling that. They are seeing and understanding that these things are still happening, even if it's being reported in a different way. In the 14th district alone, we were really instrumental in bringing about information that vehicle stops and stop and frisk based on that vehicle stops are on the rise. African American people are 3 times more likely to be stopped and frisked in a vehicle stop. The recovery of such stop is almost 1%, if that. So we're looking at policing practices and how they could create disparities in those who are being brought to our system, but also how they can create the opportunity for escalation and more devastating circumstances to happen. Our office represents kids not only in the juvenile delinquent system, but also in the child welfare system. And I can talk for a long time about the work that office is doing, but I will stay a little bit poignant and talk about the major area, which is the response to the Glen Mills situation. It was our office that gained the tapes and the information that allowed this to be brought to light. We have relationships with these placement agencies. We get every videotape. We review every videotape. Not only that, we go up and interview our children about their experiences in those placements. We report these to the major agencies, and we stay on them to make sure that they are looking at ways to ensure that our kids are not only safe, but that they're really being rehabilitated. What we've seen, the devastation of some of the abuse that we've seen, we understand that has a traumatic impact on some of these kids that are already dealing with real serious issues. So when kids are going away and they're being mistreated, they come back to their communities. What do you think they're going to have? They're going to have that anger in their hearts. They're going to have that type of mentality that shows that I don't care about anyone because no one's cared about me. That does not give us a good recipe for successful outcomes for our youth. And that is not what we want to be. And we don't want to pay for something like that actually regresses our kids' opportunities versus giving them the strength and the confidence they need to be well-adjusted adults. We understand that has an extreme impact, and we're working hard to ensure that that's not happening. We also hired more staff to do what we call a review disposition. So when kids are out of the placement, they're able to give us a more detailed analysis of what their experience was. What we were finding is that we went up there to interview them. Many did not want to talk because they still had to stay in those institutions even when we left. Some of the things that we've been doing just to look at the holistic opportunities for kids are not just their behavior, but what drives their behavior. And we put things in place to build our structure to address things such as education opportunities. We receive state funding for Project Success, and that is a grant designed to end the school-to-prison pipeline. We've hired an education lawyer that helps us understand the educational opportunities that the school may not have been given that drove the kid to be expelled from school and placed in the juvenile justice system. That is really critical to the analysis of why kids come into our system, because if we don't understand that education practice, we will never get to the bottom of ending school-to-prison pipeline. One of the other things that we have done, we wrote the city's grant for technical assistance from the Vera Institute to end incarceration for girls and LGBTQ youth. That is huge because we need to focus on what's happening with our girls. Why are there limited resources for them? Why are they being looked at as more aggressive than other counterparts? And why are they coming into the system in droves more than ever? These trends should be on everyone's radar, and the solutions that we are coming up with and being creative enough to build are really helping to understand what we need to do in our city. We have teamed up with the University of Penn to give us more in-depth analysis of treatment options and treatment plans in the community rather than just going to our go-to position of going straight to placements. We understand based on what happened to Glen Mills, and we came up with community plans for each of those kids that we had in that detention center. The kids came back to their homes. They are doing well. Their services are given to their caregivers, and those are where we really need to be focusing on. Kids need to understand their triggers and what they can do to reach out for help. Parents need to understand their options in their own community rather than relying on some middle Pennsylvania institution to do it all for them. And this is empowerment. This is not just service. Empowerment is where we need to be in the business of. One of the main empowerment tools that I am so proud of is the response that the community has given us to our community-led participatory defense initiative. And participatory defense, it's really hard to explain, but I will tell you one thing, what these communities have been able to build in their areas has been working. They have not only held the system accountable for better results, but they have held each other accountable for doing what they need to do to ensure that they do not go back to jail. And we can tell you right now that the success of these hubs, and some of them are here with us today, they are dedicated. They open their doors once a week, 2 hours a week. They have people come in. They teach them the systems process. Can you believe that most people go through this system and don't even understand what they're getting ready to go through? How can you have a system that has such a high stake and high impact on your life and you don't understand anything about it? When you go in, people talking a lot of legalese that you don't know what that is, and you make decisions based on your uninformed understanding of what's getting ready to happen to you. The participatory defense hubs explain those thoroughly. They work on packets to provide defense counsels and myself, as well as the other professionals in our office, information about the person that we would not otherwise have access to. And I need to applaud these women, these ladies and gentlemen, for the work that they're doing, because they're doing it without a dime. They're doing it for free. They're doing it because they care, and they're doing it because they want to be the change that they want to see. And what we've seen in terms of that are outcomes that I could never have imagined. But also, 100% of the people that they work with show up for every listing of court. They show up for every listing of court, which impacts case processing time that Councilman Dom asked for. They show up for every listing of court, which impacts the fact that we don't have to send our sheriffs out to effectuate warrants. All of these things work together. And while we're looking at the narrative of what's driving our costs down and reducing our criminal justice reach, things that these communities are doing needs to be touted much more. And I wish I can do more. I don't have a lot of, the platform that other people do, but it would be great if some of the council people in the districts where these hubs are currently running would go out to these hubs and view them and see how well they're working and see how much support that they're giving people that don't know what they're in for. I will say this. Philadelphia is on fire with participatory defense hubs. It is the only city that has more than one hub running at a time in the nation, and it is the only city that has the first juvenile justice hub in the nation. So this is something unique to Philadelphia. Philadelphia should be really lauded for the efforts that it's made, and not only with our justice system partners, but our community collaborators, and recognize that this is here to stay. No matter who is in leadership position, whether I'm at the defender's office or Larry's at the DA's office or whoever the mayor is, this will not go anywhere because community has now created an empowerment tool that just grows and grows and grows. And so this is one of the real sources of pride that I have of being in the city at this time. The defenders also themselves go out to the communities. We assist and participate in several resource fairs, know your systems training. We have barbershop conversations that we're going to ramp up, and we hope that some of the council allow us to come in and set up those types of things. We realize that that's where you can get real granular with people about what's really going on in our system and their opportunity that they have to change it. So I'm proud of the things that we do, and a lot of the people that you see in those pictures are not lawyers. They are administrative staff, the people that I'm standing here today asking for an increase for a livable wage. Building new partnerships. We not only partner with the community, but we have partnered with people that are our extended community. Our Philadelphia Eagles, the NFL Players Coalition. They have bought into our notion of pre-entry. They have bought into our understanding that this cash bail system does not help anyone, and they have really, really wanted to raise the profile of the community effort in this. And so they have given some money, $195,000, to these community members in our pre-entry coalition, as well as the reentry coalition, that allow us to continue to do the work that is necessary for our long-term success. Our social, one of I think this is probably one of our last slides, and our plight to real reform would not be complete without talking about the role that our social service advocates have in helping people address and find treatment programs that are within their neighborhoods. With 9 full-time positions in our adult social services practice, only 9, we have service or directed people to get engaged in services directed 1,823 people to connect them with services that are either in their neighborhoods or in other communities. This is not an easy feat, and we're looking at, this is a map of the districts in which we service those people where they reside, but also it shows, the orange circle shows the actual places where there are programs in those districts. I think what we can see that in the major districts, District 7, I believe, which is Councilwoman Maria Quinones-Sanchez, District 5 and District 8, those are our heaviest concentration of people who need certain services such as mental health and drug treatment. In District 3 and 4, we have a lot of people, but what you can see is there are not a lot of services that are in those communities that can actually foster and make sure that people are getting connected and staying engaged. We also know that in those districts, District 3 and District 4, there's a heavy Muslim population. And we're not always able to match people up with services that really engage their faith. We are often kind of finding ourselves or in a quandary of matching Muslim clients with Christian-based services, and oftentimes that those things do not create a long-lasting relationship. We do see in our orange circles that many of the services, majority of them, are centered downtown. And that also does not allow people to stay engaged with treatment services. And we want to work with any elected official and city council person that wants to talk about the needs that we are seeing in their neighborhoods, and are there enough resources to service those needs. The social service staff has also created a new opportunity for our courts to get people treatment and analysis and assessment within the same day. We used to wait 6 to 8 weeks for people to get an assessment, which cost a lot of money because people sat in jail for those 6 to 8 weeks. Now people are getting same-day services, and we did it by tweaking what we were doing. We just talked to some service providers, asked them to come into our office at the Criminal Justice Center. We staffed that room, and we have serviced about 442 clients in 2018. 61 judges have referred their criminal defendants to that hub, and we've saved an estimated $2.2 million by cutting out that 6 to 8 weeks and servicing 442 clients on the same day. That's the end of my presentation, and it really just speaks to some of the things that we are doing to impact the city's great reform efforts.
Thank you very much. I had a couple of quick questions. At our last budget hearing, we had a discussion about pensions for the public defenders. I know there's been some conversation about that. Where are we at with that?
Council President Clark, we have met with the pension board on a couple of occasions.
Okay.
Their counsel has provided us with a list of 13 factors that they wanted us to respond to. And we responded to those factors in writing, I think very persuasively, and they've told us that they've taken it under consideration and they will be getting back to us within a few days, they say. This will just be determining the eligibility for the Defender Association employees to participate in the city pension.
That was just solely for the eligibility, and
Yes.
then the parameters of what the contributions and the benefits associated with the pensions would be determined at a later date.
That's correct.
How long ago was that? The most recent conversation?
The most recent conversation was on Tuesday of this week. We checked with Fran Bielli and said, what's our status? And he said he expects to have an answer for us within the week.
Within a week, okay. So before we pass the budget, we'll have an answer one way or another.
Yes.
All right.
Fingers crossed.
So you're looking for 1.18 in your funding request, and it's 538,000 above the mayor's proposal. Does this proposed increase of 1.18 differ from the pay parity plan, or is that inclusive of the pay parity plan?
So this would be not necessarily the pay parity plan that we presented for our lawyers, that we were able to kind of compare apples to apples with our district attorney counterparts. This is looking at the city's administrative salaries for secretaries, paralegals, and other non-legal professionals. We looked at the fact that our cost of living increases haven't been given to our non-legal staff for over 10 years. We used to be in parity with the unions. Since 2010, we have not been able to receive that. Recently, we looked at DC 47's request and the ability to give cost of living increases over a 3-year period from 2016 to 2018, and we saw that they've been able to give 8.5% increase to cost of living for their staff. This is what we were asking to remain in parity with that. But we were also asking to increase some of our staff to at least get a livable wage of $15 an hour, as the rest of the city has been able to do.
What is it now, based on the current number?
What is, I'm
You're
sorry.
saying being $15 an hour is what the city is requiring for contracts.
Yes,
You all have a contract with the city of Philadelphia, basically, right?
we do, and we would need the budget increase to give some of our support staff that $15 an hour.
The question is, your support staff, are they below the $15 an hour
Yes,
number?
yes,
Yeah.
not all, but many of them are,
So at a minimum, we need to comply with that
at
standard.
the very minimum.
Per basically
Yes.
our proposal. All right. Now, back to the pay parity plan. So didn't we do something last year or midterm to deal with that in some respects?
Yes,
Do you
so
recall?
we have long been discussing the fact that our lawyers were not paid at the same rate of the district attorneys.
Right.
And this has been an ongoing battle since I was a young lawyer at the Defender Association in 1999.
Right.
The city has graciously been able to give us some pay parity and pay equity so that our lawyers from years 1 through 15 are able to make the same amount of money that the district attorney's lawyers make. And that has had a tremendous impact on our attrition rates. We've been able to retain 50% more of our experienced lawyers than we had in previous years. And so we really thank the city for that, but that has not been looked at in terms of our non-legal staff, who has not been paid equitably for many of decades and have been woefully kind of ignored for a very long time.
So the conversation, because I'm just have so many of these, last year, wasn't it primarily around the lawyers and not necessarily the non-legal staff?
It was only the lawyers.
So that
Yes.
request was not made last year.
This request was not made. We were basically trying to strategically figure out how we could advance pay parity and pay equity for all of our staff. As you know, that the mayor only gave us half of our ask, and city council helped us achieve the rest. We appreciated that a lot. And so this year, it's time for our non-legal staff to be put into the limelight and understand that what they are doing is really helping us advance reform efforts, saving dollars, but also saving lives.
Okay. I want to recognize Councilwoman Parker.
She's a mean lady, Mr. President. How you doing, Chief Defender?
How are you, Councilwoman Parker?
Let me say good afternoon to you and your staff. I want to start like I've started with every other department here in the city, and because just like we're the elected officials and you're the Chief Defender, none of us can be successful without the teams we have to work with. And with that being said, there's a Jordan Barnett who we've worked with and coordinating those expungement clinics along with CLS that you mentioned in your PowerPoint, along with Mandy, and don't kill me for chopping this up, Mandy Nace,
That's
I think
it.
it's
That's
Nace. Okay, the outreach coordinator. Now, she's the person who's been ensuring that we have Defender reps at all of our community-based activities. And then finally, I want to say there's a gentleman by the name name of Dan Stevenson, and I think he's an attorney. Now, this was a national case. Never received anything like this as an elected official. It was like homeland security, national terror issue. Just so happens that we think the person is picked up, it's on national news. All of a sudden I get a call from a constituent telling me that every major television station is parked in front of her door. Her grandson has the same name as the person who was arrested, and she calls me, and I say, Lord, I don't know what in the world to do. Call my Hillary. She gets on the phone with Dan. Dan can tell her who to let in, who not to let in, what she has to do, That's who awesome. She has to talk to. And so I wanted to say thank you to them for the record.
Thank you.
Because sometimes people don't know that we as the elected officials, when they call us and they expect us to deliver and to help, and we can't do it because we don't have the wherewithal, we call on you. And I wanted to note that for the record. Let me also just note, and I want to go back to the testimony that was given by District Attorney Krasner, and you heard me applaud him for the technical presentation that his office just presented to us. And my colleague from the 4th District made sure that he noted for the record that we also needed to recognize the work of the Defender Association. But I want you to know this has been, and last year you gave a presentation too. I've never seen a presentation like that given from the District Attorney's Office. Standard operating procedure for you, but never from the District Attorney. Now you'll take that, right? Never from the District Attorney's Office, and there are some other branches of government who could benefit from that.
I'm sure my staff would appreciate that.
Oh yes, we do. And in addition to that, I wanted to know if you could just tell me approximately how many employees who were not the legal employees are not at $15. Do you have an approximate number?
I do. So the employees who are not at $15 an hour are about 32 employees at this point. 32 of our administrative staff, and there are about 38 employees that are just at $15 an hour.
Okay, about 30 who are just at, okay. And you responded about the Fran Bielli meeting, and that was just recent, and you'll be talking to him soon about whether or not you are eligible. My question to you is that of the non-legal team, the programs that you just described, the defenders in the community, when you described the warm handoff and the other community-based activities that you have, most of those are being operated by the non-legal teams, the community-based activity?
Absolutely. It's our bail navigators are social workers and people that we say or classify as returning citizens. They have been out there giving or looking for opportunities in the community to help people and support people during their pretrial efforts. And I must say this, our social service staff, they have really impacted this city's outcomes and the opportunities that we have to find alternatives to incarceration. They make the least amount of money in the city in terms of social service professionals. The DHS social workers start at $40,000, ours are at $33,000. It's been really hard to recruit professionals in this role, even though it serves an important, it's a very important role, but it's been really hard to recruit them because we can't raise our wages. And so some of our ask is to raise wages for them because they're the ones that are out there not only finding supports, but also getting the frontline calls when someone is having an issue or a challenge, and they're trying to redirect them to get the appropriate treatment that they should be in. So these are things that people are doing mindlessly and behind the scenes that are not being a part of the narrative of what's going on in the city.
Let me also, I want to go to the data, because one of the issues that you note that your office works very hard on is analyzing policing data.
Yes.
And so what was extremely interested in me, because, I read the news and listen to the radio and listen to people talk about stats regarding crime in the city of Philadelphia, and I was a tad bit taken aback when District Attorney Krasner said that overall violent crime offenses in Philadelphia have actually decreased by 5%, although we've seen an increase of 10% in homicides. And he attributed that from the prosecution's perspective to the opioid crisis. And I want to hear what your perspective is.
So I'm glad you said that. Our social service advocates and our lawyers get a myriad of things that contribute to some of the violent crime. A lot of it we can see early on in our child welfare system. Some of the things that we represent kids in the child welfare system, and I showed you the slide that talked about just how many. But we see the things that are going to contribute to their lack of empathy and their ability to use a gun and use a weapon because they don't have the types of understanding that one would have if they were brought up in a more nurturing environment. So while there could be turf wars that are going on with some of the drug crisis, a lot of that has to do with, too, some of the gentrification. People are being forced into cities and neighborhoods that are now fighting over those turf wars, but also this has to do with the lack of esteem and awareness of the value of life. And how does that happen? That happens through a myriad of different things. It happens early on when a person has never had a structure or an environment that has helped support them throughout life. It happens when we stick them in these institutions that constantly beat them up and repeatedly tell them that they can't be anyone and bring them back out to be more desperate or angry. And it happens when people are stripped away of everything that they may have had, whatever little things that they could get a hold of. And now they are looking at, hey, if I'm desperate, I'm not going to sit here and just beg, I'm going to go get. That creates problems. So all of these things play hand in hand. It is just not about an opioid crisis. It is about the overall understanding of how poverty, social issues, and of course, the just compoundment of you do not matter and your life has no value on a person's psyche that create their opportunity to go out and take another life senselessly. And I think that if we don't look at all those things together and we just kind of looking at this opioid crisis and saying that this is driving murders, we're really missing a huge piece. We had recently, I was a judge for a kids competition to talk about violence and why violence has been inflicted so hard. And these kids from the mouth of babes, they were able to talk about how people will feel disrespected and therefore they go and pick up a gun. They were able to talk about how people come and they don't have food or clothes or clean clothes and therefore they feel less than. They talk about all of these things. They never mention drug wars. They mention the psychology and mentality that some of these kids carry around with them. And we see it early on. We see kids that are abused and beaten at ages 2 or 3 years old. And if we don't get to them at that system, they're going to grow up to be angrier adults.
Got it. Mr. President, I'll come back the second round.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Real quick follow-up one. I'll get to you. 1 second, Councilman Jones. The issue about the increase in homicides related to opioids, I'm actually not buying that, and I don't get a sense that you buy that either. I do think it's a broader, more comprehensive issue, social issues, social ills, the whole 9 yards. But if we say that, then is there any corresponding documentation? Like traditionally, if the economy gets worse, the level of crime goes up in some respects, but apparently the economy is better. So what exactly do you see from the social side that's creating this increase in homicides and violent crime?
It's better for some, not for all. I mean, unemployment rate is
the
still pretty
divide.
high. And then we're looking at these systems that engage kids at an early age. Look at the types of things or why they're coming into these systems. Why are they coming into the child welfare system? Are they being abused physically, mentally, sexually, much more at a higher rate? You have to look at all those things because that really contributes to their mentality and their psyche. Our social service advocates get all that information, and we want to compile and correlate the kids that are in our child welfare system to the people that are actually engaging in violent crime. What we were able to see in 2017 is that 30% of the kids that we represented in our child welfare system were the ones that were engaged in more of the violent crime. So there's a disconnect and there's gaps somewhere that we're not getting to.
That's what I'm trying to find out, what changed from 17 to 18 in terms of services provided or
I just used 17 because that's when we did the study. I don't know what's changed from 17 to 18, but we can go back. We have a lot of data and information, and we can start to go back. We actually did a pilot program of understanding trauma and going into the prisons when people were charged with shootings or aggravated assaults and asking them, had they ever had certain adverse actions taken upon them, meaning have they ever seen violence, had violence inflicted on them, or been abused physically or mentally or sexually? And if so, have they ever received treatment? Majority of the people answered yes, they've had those things happen to them, but no, they've never received treatment. So when we talk about becoming a trauma-informed city or trauma-informed education system or criminal justice system, if we're not asking those questions and ensuring that people are getting those things at the time that they're labeled a victim, then we are really doing everyone a disservice, because when they get to me, they lose that victim status. Even though there's a huge overlap between victim and offender, once they become a part of the criminal justice system on the defender side, they are no longer victims, and now we're looking at how can we punish.
Okay, I'm just trying to...
But I can help you more and try to figure that out.
I'm just trying to understand a lot of people want to know what happened and why, and I think we might actually be beyond last year's pace.
We are.
So what is going on? I'm saying we can follow this up and we can go on with this forever.
And we have to
but
recognize,
I need to know what has happened that maybe we are doing or not doing that has created this uptick, particularly when the quote unquote the economy is getting well. And I agree with the divide, particularly around economics and opportunities. And I thought I heard you say something about, did I hear you say gentrification?
Yes. I mean, one of the things that we've learned from a lot of our people is that gentrification has forced people in these communities together, where now they are, because of lack of opportunities for employment, they are now fighting over these corners for drug sales. So that is a part of the problem, that these drug sales are going on with these newly created communities that involve people from maybe a certain section of the city and another section of the city kind of fighting over those little turfs.
All right, let me make sure, because this, that's obviously a hot button issue. I know in the district I represent, and in particular, Breetown, and because I know they used to be getting it on in parts of those areas. So you're suggesting that, or you're saying that, with quote unquote, as everybody references them, the new people move in and they're creating a more quote unquote stable, affluent neighborhood, which is referred to in that version of gentrification, because gentrification can mean a whole lot of different things. Mm-hmm. That a corner that used to be a corner where drugs were sold or turf wars happened can no longer be on that particular corner, because all of a sudden you got $400,000 or $500,000 houses like you do in Francisville. So now you got to go somewhere else, and you're going somewhere else in an area where somebody else has kind of like already staked out that particular neighborhood, and they say, all right, well, we got a little clash. I need a piece of this corner, and you're saying that's what's driving it to something.
I'm saying that is what we're hearing from people about what's going on, from the people that we represent and also the people that we go in the communities engage with, that there are new people coming into our neighborhoods doing these things, and we can't have that. And that's real. I mean, that is on the ground, and it's real. And I think if we ignore the fact that communities are kind of being stuck together in certain ways where people weren't used to each other, right? That is creating some kind of issue. And that's not the overall overshadowing of the issue, but there are nuances to all of this, and it just can't be put on one area, which is opioid crisis.
Right. Okay, cool. All right. Sorry, Councilman Jones. Give you your full time, sir. Yeah.
This is actually the first time, Mr. President, that any department, anywhere, I went through all my questions, my staff prepared my questions, and every one of them was answered in your presentation or by my respective colleagues. I'm at a loss for words.
Well, that's a good thing.
Is that a good thing? So I went to my reserve from last year.
So we conclude the hearing? We're done?
I can go back.
Can we get the Marcel Pratt?
I can go back several years. Now, I just wanted to thank you. The city of Philadelphia gets its money's worth from the Defenders Association. You go above and beyond what your job description is by advocating for people beyond what the actual defense is, but to why was the cause of the problem in the first place. So when I see that, whether you're talking about the lifers returning home, that's not in your, I got one question, sir.
You're right.
Yeah, can you talk about what you've done for the returning citizens that were youth, juvenile lifers, that sentences were commuted? And
Yeah. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. McHugh, but before I do, I want to say that our office has hired some of those people from the juvenile lifer population. They have been some of the most tremendous workers, and they're the ones that we're fighting for as well in our ask for a livable wage. So we hire people that are classified as returning citizens, but the juvenile lifers have been giving us a lot of insight and knowledge that we wouldn't ordinarily have. We also connected them with the city to engage some of the youth, and we're hoping that they utilize them more in some strategies to talk about, hey, people that they can recognize and really believe in are those who have been there and understand. Maybe different issues today, but they're still the same principles that our juvenile lifer population understands.
Councilman Jones, we started the program just about 3 years ago. It was, we're coming up on the 3-year mark, which is what we had forecasted the program would take. And in fact, we're on schedule to finish all the resentencings, and we're within budget to have done that within 3 years. And so we've handled 210 resentencings. Of the 210 resentencing, 108 of those individuals have been released. They are out in the community. The other ones that are either waiting to finish their sentence, or they finished their sentence and they're waiting to see the parole board or get their parole date. They come to our office on a monthly basis. Those that want to, we provide a space where they meet amongst themselves, talk about the issues of reentry. As you can imagine, some of these individuals were in for 40, 30, a number of them were in for 25, 35 years. So they talk about all the issues that they have with reentry. Our staff, our mitigation specialists, our lawyers who work just in this program have been working with them on the reentry issues that they face. They've been doing amazing things. They've been working in the community. A number of them have been working in the community to combat this issue with the increase in the homicides and the violence as it is, because they have that credibility. They can go into the community and talk about mistakes that were made many decades ago and what it cost them. And it's just been an amazing program, and we're happy to say, and we were happy to be a participate in it, and we're happy to say so far it's been a great success for the individuals involved as far as getting released and getting back on their feet.
I fault Councilman Greenlee for his passion for the Defenders Association that goes way back and got me interested in it. But that 200 extra cases wasn't accounted for in your budget, was it?
No, but in fact, we had to ask the city for an increase to do that, an additional funding to do that. We did use some of our own budget and put some of our own staff to it, but the city did give us some extra funding to do that. Didn't cover the whole thing, but we were happy to be engaged in it. This is a momentous, remarkable moment in history, and we wanted to be a part of it.
Without your assistance, in many cases, that could have turned out very differently.
Yeah. And the reason why, and I'm not saying that just to brag or boast, but the Defender Association has been around since 1934. That is before states or people even got the right to a lawyer. So we've perfected our model of representation, and that has been unwavered. And we only perfected even more. We've added these other additional things recently, but one thing for sure is that the way we approach our trials and our trial practice, there's going to be little room for someone to scream ineffective assistance of counsel at that level of practice. And so we use people that have had 20, 30 years of experience to represent those who have been charged with some of the most serious crimes in our city, and that's who represented them, and they did a great job.
So I would encourage my colleagues to take a look at the participatory defense model. People sit around in a group and they talk about how they're preparing. Did you get pictures with your family? Did you go back to get that letter from the high school teacher, so that when they are coming to court, they're not just a docket number, that the judge gets to look at them as a human being, as a father, as a brother, as a person who provides care for others. And no, it's not perfect, but when you walk in CJC and you don't know what it's like another world, and people are speaking a foreign language, and you're just like a number going through a factory. This process that they have, when I sat through it, allows them to have the courage to show up. Like, I'm actually going to go to court. I'm not going to oversleep. I'm going to go to court with the best face forward that I can present in my own defense. I think it's a pretty interesting model. So there are a lot of firsts under you. There are a whole bunch of firsts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Elaborate, would you?
I mean, some of them are here today, and they're holding up support. Wow, nice, thank you. Support public defense increase. That they're here today. Some of them are part of the juvenile lifer population. They are people that have been impacted by the system, that understood what they didn't get. They don't want someone else to go through that. So it's not just providing letters of support and all that, but it's also looking at what's the evidence that someone can't get a hold of that you can, and if you don't get it now, it's going to be gone. Those allow us to mount successful and competent defenses that people deserve, because otherwise someone would be looking at a plea deal because we don't have the information that we need to really fight their case. And I think people deserve the right to be heard and the right to have all of the information presented through their defense counsel so that they can really advocate on their behalf and get the best outcome that this incident warrants. And we've been seeing that. Not only have we been seeing it in terms of the number of trials that we've been able to impact, but the types of ways that people are looked at now. People come into court by themselves and nobody else comes with them. When these people show up, they show up to court. So when other people decide not to come, I don't think that's an option, because community is holding them accountable. They're showing up, so the person's showing up. But when they show up to court, it's less likely to get a type of biased decision because your life doesn't matter. I don't know who you are. You're coming here accused of a crime. When you got a community behind you, it's more likely to say that there's something redeemable about you. Let me take a minute to figure it out, rather than just making a decision based on what I think about you because of my lack of understanding of you, because I don't have a lot of contact with your community. And that's what impacts racial bias and reducing racial bias. You can't policy that away. You have to force it down the throats of decision makers to show this is a whole person, and I'm going to show you why his or her life matters.
Mr. Chairman, I rest my case.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you. Chief Defender, when you mentioned gentrification, I want you to know that somewhere, somehow, Dr. Reverend Alan Iwala is listening to you, and he is saying that someone has finally told the truth publicly.
That's my pastor. Thank you. We didn't practice that either. But thank you, Reverend Waller.
No, honestly, because that is a message that hasn't been well received. He's talked about that with the increase in gangs that we have in the immediate area surrounding Enon West. And when he has talked about it on the radio and talked about it in public forums, people sometimes look like their skins have cringed, but he was speaking truth about that. With that being said, I'm wondering whether or not some traditional services that we offer in the city, organizations we work with, and they usually keep their fingers on the pulse of what's happening in the communities. I'm thinking of Town Watch Integrated Services. So TWIST, when we find out if the fight started on social media, at a party over the weekend, then spilled over in school, and then finally it, acted its way out publicly via violence on the commercial quarter. Your office does a lot of communicating with those non-legal, already sort of structured and organized town watches and things of that nature.
So we've been doing our best, making more of an effort to go out and find these pillars of the community that can really help intersect in what's going on. We did that when we saw our representation of youth who may have picked up a gun in reaction to what happened last night, and they don't want to use it, and they've never used one, but they picked up a gun. We try to look for programs such as Ceasefire and connect them with that youth to try to figure out what of the decisions that you have available to you, because some people feel like they're in communities that are over-policed and underprotected, and that in order for them to stay, safe, they got to do it themselves. And we're trying to get that mantra out of people's heads, but it's something that people really live. And if people don't come in and understand when there's a shooting, let's talk to all the kids involved and talk about our options that we have here. Because I don't want you to go pick up that gun and use it foolishly or get it taken from you and have it used on you. I mean, these are real things that we can't negate by just looking at data and stats. We have to talk to people, find those connections, and bring them together. And I think the juvenile lifer population can be really, really helpful in that, because some of them made those same decisions and cost them a lot of time.
I want to go back to that data that you just referenced, and this 10% increase in the homicide rate. And 10%, I don't know. Let me see, there's 314. So that looks like there's 30 more. Now, this is the data from 2018. What's the percentage that you would say the Defenders Association represents?
That's a great question. At this time, the Defender Association is contracted to represent 20% of all homicides.
20%.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We did put in a proposal to the city, however, not too long ago, to represent more, 40%, to double that amount. Because the reason why is we show that, one, the way our representation model has been studied, and it has been touted as the best in the nation. So we've been number one in representing people charged with those serious crimes, such as homicide, and when we had the death penalty, those cases as well. But secondly, what Mr. McHugh saw is that our case processing time, in terms of aiding a person through this process of being charged with a homicide, is about 40 days shorter than any other council in the system. So that's 40 days less time that they would spend here in the county with our representation, because we use mitigators, social workers, investigators, and lawyers to get the job done. And that model you won't find in private counsel, no matter how much you pay them.
Right, and so then the other private counsel who contracts with the city, they in turn represent the other percentage. Yes. Got it. Let me close, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, again by just saying thank you to you for what you do. You represent a holistic approach to criminal justice reform, and you bring a spirit of innovation. I don't know, for those who have had the opportunity to walk through City Hall, I think outside of almost every office, here I am telling my age. In the newspaper, Councilman Greenlee, they used to print off a picture of a block. And on the block, it was every problem that you could think of where you needed city services. And they had started it, Council President, when I was a staffer for Councilwoman Tasco, and it became the hottest thing on the market, because if it was a rodent problem, the number, the contact, the pest control was there, whatever it was. You did that for us via sort of charting your way through the criminal justice system. And I know we have it outside, and I walk through the halls, you see that outside of people's offices. And again, that is very practical. It's innovative thinking, because it helps people to chart their way when you can't just verbally explain it. Sometimes you need a visual. I need a visual for a lot of things to navigate my way through it, and it helps. So I think you have a lot of members of this body who are interested in seeing your department to continue to thrive, or the organization that is, and just keep up the good work, and stay recruiting and competitive. So your lawyers are competitive. Now it's the non-legal staff.
Yes.
Okay, we got it. We got it.
Thank you so much, Councilman.
Thank you, council people, council lady and councilman. Did we get your diversity numbers?
No, I do have my diversity. Here it goes. Can you?
Is it in your testimony? We didn't see it.
In terms of our workforce demographic, our minority percentage is 46%. At this point, I can pass this up to you if you'd like to just see.
Or we can make sure we get a copy. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you
I'll continue
so
to do
much.
a good job.
Thank you,
look forward to
council
working with
members.
you.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Oh, We're not done yet, folks. Hold on. Got to do the official thing. There being no additional questions, this committee will stand in recess until Tuesday, April 29th, 2019 at 10 a.m., at which time we will reconvene in room 400, City Hall. Thank you all very much.